Hello, hello, and welcome to Glassdoor Recruit. My name's Samantha Zupin, and I am Glassdoor's Vice President of Corporate Communications. Whether you are joining us here in the beautiful city of Chicago or on our live stream from across the US to Canada, to Norway, to India, or Australia, on behalf of all of Glassdoor, welcome. So let's take care of a few things to help make sure that everybody gets the most out of today's event. So first, pull out your iPhones, your Androids, or whatever that you have. Go to the App Store and go to the Event Mobi app, and then enter in Recruit 18, okay? Also throughout today, when you hear an interesting quote, or you hear an interesting factoid, or you want to show your social networks that you're here and investing in your career and your company, use hashtag GDRecruit. Also, if there's colleagues of yours that aren't joining us here today, but you too think that they should be investing in their careers and also investing in your companies, encourage them to join our live stream by visiting www.glassdoor.com/recruit. All right, so let's talk about why we are all here today. At Glassdoor, we believe that hiring is one of, if not the most important things in business. So with the changing job market, and of course this intense economy that we're in, the role of the recruiter and the hiring manager is even more challenging and even more competitive. Take, for example, that there are 6.7 million open jobs in the US today, showing signs of strong hiring by employers. You can also take into account that in 2009, there were roughly 6 unemployed job seekers for every 1 single open job. Fast forward to today, there is about 1 unemployed job seeker for every 1 open job. So, moments like this can appear when hiring managers and recruiters are trying to deal with this environment that we're in today, and we're trying to find that right candidate. We feel pressure to hire fast. We feel pressure to hire well. We feel pressure of mounting workloads all around us. We feel pressure to support company productivity. We feel pressure to build great company cultures. It's a lot. And here at Glassdoor and with this event, we aim to provide you with the tools and resources to help you strengthen your recruiting strategies so that you can hire to win. So at Glassdoor, when we think about hiring to win, one of the most important aspects we think of is putting ourselves in the shoes of the job seekers first. At Glassdoor, we conducted research to find out not only what is it that brings job seekers to your company, but what is it that job seekers are looking for long term. Here's what they said. A fair and competitive pay and benefit package, opportunities to grow their career, track records of promoting from within, positive sentiments from employees, and of course, if they're looking for the long term, they are also looking for good business outlook. So combine this hunger for information from job seekers with the fact that recruiting itself is constantly changing. It's impacted by evolving technology. It's changing, and welcome, I would say, because of rise in diversity and inclusion. There's also an increase of employee advocacy and engagement, and recruiting is also changing because of a greater concern around employee retention. So when we hone in on evolving technology, today you are going to be hearing a host of sessions and employers sharing how they are leveraging technology to find candidates, how they're leveraging technology to support candidate experience, and how they're leveraging technology to support lower turnover and greater retention. Second, diversity and inclusion. So a growing topic among executives. In a study by Deloitte, we found that in 2014, 32% said diversity and inclusion is an important topic. In 2017, just last year, 69% said diversity and inclusion was important. I wonder how long it's going to take to get the 100%. But we have a great panel today that's going to be diving into this topic to help further the conversation, to reduce and hopefully eliminate bias in the hiring process, and of course, therefore support a more inclusive workforce. When it comes to employee advocacy and engagement, I think we all know the power of an employee referral is one of the most effective sources of hire that we can have. In today's digital world, that referral is now on hyperdrive. Again, you're going to have the opportunity today to hear from a host of employers about how they're tapping into employees to help them better recruit. And lastly, with employee retention, according to Glassdoor economic research, an employee stays with a company an average of 15 months. You're going to hear some really interesting research that does a deep dive as to why employees are leaving the company and how we, at the early stages of the recruiting and hiring process, can help support lower turnover and greater retention. We have a really impressive lineup of companies and people here to speak, from Amazon to Kellogg's to the Oprah Winfrey Show to WeWork. So with that, please grab your notepads and your iPads and your Google Docs and your Work Docs and whatever else you have, and join me in welcoming the person who spearheads Glassdoor's economic research, providing insightful labor trends, my colleague, Glassdoor Chief Economist Dr. Andrew Chamberlain.
Thank you. I hope everybody's had their coffee today, ready to go. Okay, it's a pop quiz, everybody. Anybody know what this is? Any guesses? Stock market? No? Not the stock market. I thought for sure someone would guess Bitcoin, but I feel like every story I read is about Bitcoin today. So no, this is not about any of those things. What this is a picture of is a recruiting professional's worst nightmare, right? This is the struggle you face every day. This is time it takes to hire the average job in the United States. As you can see, it's been soaring as the economy has improved. It's now up to 31 days on average, and that's almost double what it was back in 2010, if you remember the good old days. So this today is, in my opinion, in 2018, the single biggest problem recruiting professionals face. When I go to dinner and talk to people, this is all everyone talks about. How am I going to find candidates? What are some strategies we can use to get around this? So facing this challenge means many recruiting professionals are changing their strategies to try to get around this, right? They're trying to figure out what can we do to avoid having to go to the market to rehire. And that means focusing on retention, which is what I'm talking about today. Okay, so keeping the employees you already have longer, but also retention begins before anybody walks in the door, right? Retention begins at the hiring process when you pick this person versus this other person because you think they're going to stay longer and they're a better match. All right? So I'm a chief economist at Glassdoor. We do research on this subject. Today I'm going to share with you what some of my research says about how to get better retention and how to hire better so that your people will stay longer in the long run, okay? So today I'm going to talk about three big things. So the first thing is I want to get us all on the same page about what drives retention. Why do people stay versus go? So I'm going to show you some research about why people tend to stay and thrive and why they leave companies every time they change jobs. Second, I'm going to talk about some hiring strategies you can use. So looking forward, not just about the people you've already got, but the people you're trying to bring on board, some hiring strategies so you can get better retention for them. And then the third thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stop talking about research and I'm going to get practical. The third thing I'm going to show you today is a real-world case study of an employer, a Canadian financial services company, that I think is doing an awesome job boosting career opportunities inside the company. And they have a really innovative program that I think is going to help them retain people longer. So I want to show it to you as an example, so you don't just leave with a bunch of numbers, you can actually have a plan about what you might do. Okay? So first I want to show you the research. Okay? So in 2017, I published a study using millions of Glassdoor resumes. And the research question was, how come sometimes people on their resumes, when they jump job to job, they're always jumping to a new company every time? And how come sometimes people jump job to job, but they stay in the same company and rise up and thrive? And what is it about those people? Like, why do we get one person versus the other? Okay? So that research was really like a tale of two resumes. And here's what we saw, is on the left, we saw people like John Job Lever. So these are folks who every time on their resume when they change roles, they seem to jump ship from companies, one after the other. And then in the resumes, we also saw people who were more like this person on the right, Jane Job Stayer. So Jane, in many ways, looks just like John. Same roles, same companies sometimes, but she stays and rises, whereas he jumps every time. So the question we asked is, what can the data tell us about why is one person Jane and one person John? Is it pay? Is it culture? Or is it something else? Okay? So I'm going to show you that research today. So the first thing we found looking at resumes, unfortunately for your sake, most people are like John. They tend to leave companies every time they change roles. Almost 3/4 of people in our sample left companies when they changed roles. Only about 1/4 stayed and thrived. So in my opinion, this is really the core of the retention issue. What all of us should be trying to do is flip this pie chart the other way. You know, we really should have most people staying for at least 2 roles or 3. People may not stay forever, but they shouldn't be jumping every time. There should be enough career opportunities in the company that people can thrive. So that's the first fact, is this is a huge problem and there's a lot of opportunity here, right? So when we looked at what factors really drive retention, there were 3 that stood out most. Now, these are not all the factors that drive retention. I'm sure you guys realize every local area is different, and there's a long list of theories you might have about why people stay and go. But these are 3 factors that really stood out in the data. They were totally clear statistical drivers of people staying versus going. So the first factor is role stagnation. And what this is people staying in the same job title for long periods of time without any advancement. Powerfully, that drove people out the door in our data. Second is better culture elsewhere. Well, as I'll show you in a minute, people almost always, when they leave companies voluntarily, they almost always end up going somewhere with better Glassdoor ratings along some dimensions. It's such a clear pattern, it's hard to avoid focusing on that. And then the third factor is better pay. People walk out the door when their comp isn't the market rate, frankly. They get a better offer and go. So those are the 3 main drivers, and what I want to do is dive in a little deeper on each one of these and spend a minute talking about them. Because when you guys leave today, what I want you to have is like a North Star. So when you go back home and have conversations about retention and how to fix it, I want these to be like your playbook, you know, the North Star that guides all conversations as a baseline that's actually based in the research. This isn't the full answer for how to get retention, but this is a pretty darn good place to start if you're going to make investments. All right, so let's take a closer look at these, all right? So the first one is stagnation. So what we found in the data is every 10 months, someone stays in the same job title, 10 months, 10 months, 10 months. It makes them 1% more likely that they are going to exit the company the next time they change roles. And that's a cumulative effect that adds up. So whether you intend to send a signal or not to employees, when you let people stagnate in a role, you're really sending the signal to them that they will have to look elsewhere to greener pastures at other companies if they want to advance, frankly. So it's no surprise that stagnation is one of these things that, you know, if you hire people on and you don't already have a career progression in mind on day one, this is a big risk for you, as it's no surprise people are eventually going to leave. I think this is interesting to point this out as a factor because this is cheap to fix also. There's a perception with retention that it's all about money and that the reason people leave is we can't pay them enough to keep them. This is a factor that is just like you need to have a different plan for how you manage talent. It doesn't necessarily cost a lot out of pocket, and that's good news. So the second factor that drives people out the door is company culture. And when we looked at the data, this is what we found. People almost always leave for companies with better culture along a bunch of dimensions. So in this chart here, the blue bar is the Glassdoor ratings for people's original company, and these are people who left and went someplace else. The green bar is the ratings at their new company. So this is just 3 dimensions, but on every one that we looked at, we found this, some bigger than others. And so what this is telling you, right, is that people are paying attention to things beyond pay. And so how big is this effect statistically? How big is the magnitude of this? So what we found is that a 1-star difference in Glassdoor rating amounted to a 4 or in some cases 5% more likelihood that they will leave the company for their next role. So 4 or 5%. That is a really big effect compared to what I showed you before for stagnation. This is the equivalent, so having like a 1-star lower rating in the numbers here is equivalent to letting somebody stagnate in a job for like 40 months or 50 months, which is like a totally absurd amount of time, right? So it shows you the magnitude of this. This is one of the most important factors that drives retention. And like stagnation, the good news is this is not necessarily expensive to fix. So I'm sure there's plenty of Glassdoor reps in the room who have all kinds of suggestions for ways people can, improve Glassdoor ratings using, strategies that don't cost a fortune. I'm sure they would be happy to share some of those ideas. So that's the second factor I want to share with you, culture. And the third factor is pay. So what we found is pay matters, but it is definitely not the biggest factor. Culture and stagnation were far more important in my view, but pay was there, and it is a statistically important driver. 10% higher pay made people about 1.5% more likely to stay when they are ready to change to their next job. Pay is not just about what your comp tools tell you also. Perception is the reality in many cases in pay. What matters to people is what they think the pay is elsewhere, and increasingly today with more pay transparency, there's more information than ever out there. That's where you want to be looking for trying to understand how pay is driving your people to stay versus go. You need to look at like what the landscape is for information out there. Okay, that is what the research says about the people you already have. So this is for your existing workforce. These are the factors that drive them to stay versus go. So in the second part of this talk, I'm going to change directions. Now we're going to look to the future. We're going to look at people you have not hired yet, and I'm going to suggest some strategies to you for recruiting that are going to help you get people in the door that will stay longer, okay? So I'm going to suggest to you 4 pillars that I think any recruiting strategy should have if you want to have great retention. All right, so let's have a look. So the first pillar for hiring people that will stay longer is focusing on informed candidates, okay? Now, candidates can get informed in 2 ways. First, you can say things to them, and then second, they can go do research and find things on their own. So the first thing you need to make sure you're doing is when you communicate to them, you need to be clear about culture, what the job really is and what it isn't, and just doing the best you can to align their perception of what their life will be in this role versus the reality. So that can go a long way. I know many of you are already doing that, but that's just a reminder that what you say does matter to candidates, and it's one way you get more informed people by being more transparent and clear about what it's really like to work there. But the second way people get informed is they go do research. So Glassdoor obviously has been a pioneer here, bringing transparency to the job market. People are reading reviews, they're talking to their friends, and that's a second way that people are self-selecting and making themselves a higher quality candidate by investing the time to get smart and study up before they apply. So these informed candidates, these people who do the homework, we found there's 2 important things you get when you hire informed candidates. 2 important things. One important thing is that our research shows these people tend to stay longer in jobs, and I'll show you that in a second. But there's a second side benefit that maybe many haven't thought of, which is that when people stay longer in the job, you aren't facing as many rehiring costs. Every time there's turnover, there's always recruiting costs, there's onboarding, and those costs are significant. They can be 20% of a salary. So those savings can be really significant. It can have a huge financial benefit. So here's the research showing that educated candidates tend to stay longer. What this is a survey that we did, a nationally representative sample of workers, over 2,000 people, and we asked them for their past jobs. Did you use Glassdoor to find it, or did you not? And then we asked them, were they still in that job, or how long did they stay in those jobs? So this is the result we found. So in the green bar, this shows that people who got educated and spent time on Glassdoor when they found their last job, about 66% of them were still in that job, on average over 4 years. So 66% retention for those people. For the people who did not and used all other sources, it was like a 49% retention rate. So that gap between them means there's like a 30% higher retention rate for people who get informed on Glassdoor. Now, this makes sense in many ways. If any of you have had this experience, people just coming over the transom who haven't really done their homework, obviously they're not going to be as good of a fit. The folks who are channeling themselves through their own action and their own investment through places like Glassdoor, they're raising their hand as higher quality, more informed candidates. So these people can also save you money. So I wanted to show you an example of the magnitude we're talking about. Like if you get better retention, that you can save on those turnover, churn and burn costs. So to show people this, I built this calculator that I'll show you here. This is free online at glassdoor.com/research. And it shows you a ballpark estimate for what you could expect if you hire candidates from a platform like Glassdoor who have higher retention versus non-Glassdoor platforms. So in this simple example, you got a company, they're hiring 100 people, and those jobs pay about $50,000 each. And what our research shows is ballpark, if you hire those candidates through Glassdoor, you're going to have to rehire around 34 of them over 4 years. If you hire from all other sources, you're going to have to rehire about 51. So each time you rehire, right, there's some cost. And what the literature shows is the average cost for rehire is something like 20% of salary. Of course, that varies a lot depending on whether it's C-suite or a retail clerk. But if you assume a 20% of salary cost to rehire each of those people, it's a savings of $170,000. So this is just an illustration. Obviously, your experience will vary around this, but this gives you like a perspective on the magnitude of what we're talking about. This is only 100 roles paying $50,000 each. Imagine if you're hiring 5,000 roles in six-figure occupations. It can be big numbers. So this is the secret hidden cost of bad turnover that I think many people aren't even really thinking about. Okay, so that's the first pillar of a hiring strategy to get more informed candidates. I've got 3 more pillars. So the second pillar, offer competitive pay. So this might seem to be common sense, but I want to remind you that competitive pay is not just what your comp tools tell you. The reality is, in today's world, people are looking online. They are looking at salary estimates on places like Glassdoor. So we have a Know Your Worth tool, which I assume many of you have seen the Know Your Worth tool. It's been out for a year and a half, 2 years now. Has anybody not seen the Know Your Worth tool? Maybe? Okay, maybe everyone has seen the Know Your Worth tool. Anyway, so you should, if you haven't seen it, you should be, of course, watching that. That is the reality that is impacting decisions by your candidates, regardless of what your comp tools say. And the great thing about salary estimates on Glassdoor is you have an opportunity to give feedback if you think that they're not reflecting the current rate for positions. So you should be doing so. So that's the second strategy, right? The third strategy is, if you're all here, you're probably already thinking about company culture. So Glassdoor has been a pioneer demystifying what company culture is and how to measure it. So in our employer center, as you all know, I'm sure, we have technology that transforms reviews into analytics, so you can track trends and you can benchmark against the competition. And our research shows that culture really is an important driver of why people stay and thrive at companies, right? And every piece of research we've done, culture always turns out to be a bigger factor than pay, even though pay is what gets people in the door. And so if you don't have a recruiting strategy that's consistently benchmarking culture and monitoring it against the competition, you should, because it does seem to matter. In doing so, will help you get people who will stay longer. All right, the fourth and final strategy I'll suggest for hiring people who stay longer is build career pathways inside your company. Career opportunities. So this is a topic that I am particularly passionate about because the skills landscape in the job market today is changing very rapidly. Nobody's job today is going to be the same 10 years from now, none of us. And companies today, I think, are missing an opportunity to keep talent in-house by not letting people's jobs change with them, with their priorities, and with the changing skills landscape in their fields. People often have to jump ship and move to another company to keep growing in their skill set and staying on top of the market. So finding ways to let your employees learn and take risks and reinvent themselves and thrive is very important. Your people will love you for it, but it is essential if you want to do anything about retention. If you don't have a plan for allowing career opportunities and a meaningful arc for employees, if you don't have that in your company, it's hopeless to try to change retention, because this is like the single biggest reason why people pick up and go. So think about career opportunities. So on that note, that's all I have to say about research, okay? So on the note of career opportunities, so now in the last few minutes of my talk, I'm going to share a case study with you. So this is a real-world, practical example of a company that I think has done a very good job building career opportunities inside the company, and I think it's helping them retain people. So the company is ATB Financial. So they're a Canadian financial services company. And here's what the program is I want to share with you. So every company that's represented here, I'm sure, has a program to promote people up within the same job family, escalating people up to manager, to C-suite, and beyond. But what very few companies have is a formal program for horizontal movement into new job families, as especially young workers figure out what they're good at and what they want to do and what their passions are and where the opportunities are, and they want to move from one role to another. So a finance analyst wants to become a data scientist when they realize they're a pretty good programmer, or a salesperson wants to become a digital marketer when they realize they're probably, better with the technology and scale. So often, these people walk out the door because it's quite a challenge to reinvent yourself inside the same company. It's hard to get people to see you differently once you've been hired in one role. It's hard to get managers to let you go. And that's a huge reason why people pick up and leave. So the program I'm going to show you tries to solve that. So this is the program at ATB Financial. They call it My Career. And I think of it as role experimentation. So people have the ability to temporarily take on assignments in other orgs, and if it works out, it could become a permanent hire, and people can move. So there's three really awesome things about this program I want to share with you. The first thing is that it's company-wide. So it's not just STEM occupations. It's really everybody in the company, essentially, has the ability to raise their hand and say, I want to make a move from role A to role B. So the second thing that I think is really great about this program is that it is fueled by a really robust learning and development program. So why do you need a learning and development program for role mobility? Well, what's going on with learning and development is people are doing trainings and picking up new skills, and they're looking out at the job market and looking at new opportunities, and they're thinking differently about themselves and what they can do and seeing what they're good at and not good at. That learning and development process changes workers. And that has really been the fuel for their career, for their talent mobility program, because it showed people the opportunities and it's got them ready for successful transitions. You really can't have this kind of program unless you've got really robust learning. Then the third thing that I think is awesome about this program is it defused the single biggest hurdle to horizontal mobility in any company. So what is the single biggest factor stopping people from moving from one org to another inside a company? It's managers, right? Managers, bless their souls, they want to keep their talent, and they have a partial view of the organization. They defend their territory. They want to keep their best people. They never want to see them go off to another org. They feel like it's a loss. But what this program did is it educated managers to help them see the general view, the same view that the CEO sees, so that they could see that having a person move from one role to the other could be a company win, not a departmental loss. And it also armed employees with the materials and language they needed to have these conversations with managers. So it institutionally made it smooth for this to happen, both for job seekers and for managers. So the goal of the program was to boost career opportunities. Did it work? Well, here's from ATB's internal sentiment surveys. So the blue line is 2016, before the program launched, and the green is 2018, the latest survey. And on all of these dimensions about career opportunities and do I feel supported by management in my career and so on, they saw significant bumps. And if you talk to people at ATB, they'll tell you the main reason they believe this change happened was this program, is that people really, a significant number, something like close to 500 employees made use of this talent mobility program out of a total staff of like 5,000 people. So it's a pretty significant chunk of the company used this program. So it did seem to boost career opportunities. The second thing it did, though, was it had some financial impacts that maybe weren't anticipated when they first launched. So first of all, on the left here, you can see it really reduced their hiring time from around 35 to 45 days on average down to around 20 days. So if you remember the first chart that I put up here about the worst nightmare for recruiting professionals, this program slayed that, at least for the people hired through this program. And also it saved some financial dollars on recruiting by hiring 80 internal hires. They saved about $125,000 financially. So the main goal of the program was to improve perceived career opportunities at the company. But there are these side benefits that totally were not obvious to me, and that's why we wanted to do this case study. These are the kinds of lessons you learn by digging into a real-world experience at a company. So 3 benefits I want to share with you that are a surprise, I think. First is that this talent mobility program really helped them hit diversity goals and attracted different kinds of people from the outside. So why did that happen? Well, when you're letting people move internally, you're not putting people into buckets based on their previous job titles or their college degree. You're looking at skills. And that's the single biggest thing that makes it hard to hit diversity goals, is that the pipeline of people coming up through certain job titles and degrees is not as diverse as the population. So this program actually led to some surprise hires and roles. People who would never have gotten through the hiring process externally ended up in more technical roles. Second, the program streamlined onboarding. Of course, if you're hiring internal people, these are people who already know the culture, they already have relationships, and so there were some benefits there. And then the third benefit was it really did improve performance across the hiring org. As I showed you, lowering recruiting costs and reducing those time to hire. So those are some side benefits, aside from boosting career opportunities and retention, that I think are really interesting, and it shows you that there's more than one reason to do a program like this. However, of course, there are challenges to a program like this. So I'd be remiss if I didn't highlight a couple of those. You should go in with open eyes. These programs are not easy, right? Otherwise, everyone would have them. So one of the big challenges that we found talking to them was when you allow employees to do temporary stints in other orgs, they learn some skills and have a new experience, and if it doesn't work out and they decide they need to come back to their existing role, they're often changed as an employee, and there can be challenges fitting people back into their old roles and keeping them satisfied. So this was something that really wasn't anticipated, I think, when they launched that program, and it has been a challenge. I think what you have to do is accept that if people do a temporary assignment and then come back, their role is going to have to change somewhat, and let them take on some new responsibilities that reflect the new things that they learned in the experience. And the second challenge is you obviously can't accommodate every request for a role change. The company's roadmap is going to determine what talent you need in what spots. And so you need to have language available to make people feel valued, even when you have to say no, that we can't accommodate this role change. So I think there are many folks that had dreams of one career path or the other, and they just were not consistent with the direction their business was going. Okay, so today we talked about three big things, okay? So I'm going to remind you. So the first thing we talked about is I tried to get everybody on the same page about retention. What does the research say about why people stay versus why they go? And the big factors: culture, pay, and people stagnating too long in their job titles. The second thing we talked about is I tried to give you 4 strategies that you can use for hiring so that for the people who haven't even walked through the door yet, that they will stay longer, that you get people from day one who will have better retention. And then the last thing is we tried to get down to brass tacks and give you a real-world example of an internal talent mobility program that I think is really doing a good job at this today. So don't be heartbroken when people leave. Don't take it personally. Don't be sad. People will move on. It's part of life. There's many factors you can't control when your employees leave you. But the message I want to leave you today is there are many factors you do control. You are empowered to change things like perceived culture, whether people stagnate, and what the comp is and roles. And so what I'm hopeful today is that I've given you something of a North Star, an organized way to think about retention and to use data to measure it. And I hope that you'll go home and have a playbook for boosting your own retention in the future. So thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you so much. That was great. Thank you to everybody in the room and also on the live stream. We're going to be taking some questions. So please feel free to tweet at us if you are on the live stream at #GDRecruit. Andrew, we're going to kick it off with this first question. You mentioned ATB Financial's talent mobility program, very impressive stuff. Do you actually know why they decided to launch that program to begin with?
I do. The history of the ATB program is in a case study that we're coming up for publication soon. It was something of a historical accident. So the company was facing like a technological transition. They were moving from one suite of office products to another. And they had to make a choice. Do we go to outside consultants to help us get this done, or do we try to do it in-house? They decided to do it in-house, but they realized they did not have all the IT staff that they needed to get it done. So they decided to open it up to the 5,000-person organization, let people raise their hands to temporarily come and take on this assignment to get the whole company moved over to this new technology. And so you had people who weren't in the IT org at all coming over and helping with the transition and getting it set up. And at the end, they realized, wow, like we had no idea how much talent we were sitting on. There were all these people who wanted to get into more technical roles who were just sitting in non-technical positions. That was the spark that really ignited the program. And so they started out with a pilot in 2016, a temporary program to try role mobility. They got pretty good results, and now the program is a permanent thing.
Thank you
so
for that
historical
context.
accident.
Do we have a question in the room? Don't be shy, everyone. Okay, well, we'll take another one from the live stream. Please raise your hand if you do have a question in the room.
We need more coffee.
We'll come on over with a mic for you. All right, Andrew. A few people are curious, what's on your radar as far as big hiring and recruiting trends?
Hiring and recruiting trends. So each year we publish a big study on 5 things we see coming down the pipe. I get asked questions a lot about automation and the use of what people call AI technologies in recruiting. Specific examples would be things like an AI chatbot that schedules on-sites with candidates instead of having a manual person do it. So I think that there's a lot of routine tasks in recruiting and HR, and I think we're going to definitely see more of this. Do I think it's going to lead to like big changes in jobs? No, not right away, because mostly what technology does is people team up with technology and get superpowers from it. They don't typically get fully replaced. What technology often does is it replaces like the worst, most mundane, boring parts of the job, and it leaves behind the creative stuff, which people are best at and can actually justify higher pay. So I'm quite optimistic about it. One concern that I have, though, is that we will eventually go through a next recession, and when that happens, there are always layoffs, and after that's all over and we start rebuilding, with a lot of new automated technology around the economy, I'm not sure the same roles will be hired back after the next recession. Like, I think that what's going to happen is, when you've shed some employees and gone through hard times in a recession, it gives companies a chance to like rethink their workforce from scratch. And I think you're going to see a lot of companies making different choices about whether they hire back this person or that person later, because they're getting used to the technology that has automated a lot of their jobs. So that's one big trend that's on my mind, is use of automation. I think there's much more to come.
Great, thank you. Any questions in the room? Yes. Give us 1 second.
Oh, we'll get a mic to you, yeah.
Microphone to you, and I'm gonna.
Maybe you could shout it out. I can just repeat your question if you want. Yeah. So okay, so the question is about counteroffers, okay? So if someone's planning to leave, they get a counteroffer back and they accept it, how long do they stay? So unfortunately, the research we did didn't look at this at all. We don't know anything about counteroffers in our data. But from the research that I have seen elsewhere, I'm not super optimistic about the ability of counteroffers to keep people. I think, frankly, once people have gone through the process of seeking an outside offer, interviewing, nailing down an offer, getting an offer letter, by that time, they've done a lot of reflection on their life path and career. And money is not the factor that's going to keep people long term. So I'm not optimistic that counteroffers really should even be used in most cases. So when we look at the research of what makes people satisfied at their jobs, so we've looked at pay, we've looked at all these dimensions of culture like work-life balance and the quality of your managers and your career opportunities and other stuff, the quality of the CEO. Among all the factors, pay is never toward the top. It's always there, but it's never among the top 3. It's always things like career opportunity and the culture of the company, like is it a toxic place or a great place to work, and the senior leadership, whether the person at the helm is someone you believe in or not. That's really what keeps people there. So does a counteroffer do anything to change any of those? I'm like, no. So probably not.
All right, looks like we have a question up in the balcony.
Hi, hello. So I actually have a few questions in reference to ATB. Besides technical roles, did they focus on any other career paths for the employees? For example, like if people are interested in like marketing department or human resources and things like that, and how did they use or leverage the learning development team to make that happen?
Yeah, so all roles in the company, every role was open to the role mobility program. So it wasn't just technical roles. There were an example of a non-technical role would be, there were some cases where I think there was someone who was in a sales or marketing org and they pivoted and became like they pivoted into the HR org, like into a learning and development role, like developing course materials. So that's not really a technical role, and that's an example of a change. So my take on this is that ATB is a financial company. There are many technical roles there, but there are many non-technical. There are many sales and administrative folks also. And the most important employees, the employees for which this program is most important, in my view, are not like mid-career and senior people. Those people mostly already know what they're doing. It's people early in their career who are fresh out of school and trying out this thing and that thing and figuring out what they're good at and not. Those are the people who you really need to allow mobility for because they haven't figured out what they're going to do long term yet. And a lot of those people are not in technical roles. So yeah, I don't think it should just be restricted to tech people. I think all employees can benefit from it.
You mentioned the reasons why people leave their jobs or why people stay. Did you see a correlation or any trend in your data between male and female job seekers, or was it just across the board, those top 3 reasons?
I always get asked this question. So in all the research we do, we always try to account for these confounding factors. These things like, oh, maybe these people have more education, maybe they're older or younger, maybe they're in one industry or the other, and maybe they're male versus female. So in the research I just showed you, we did account for gender, age, education, all those demographic characteristics, because we wanted to see whether they were significant drivers of turnover too. Might be useful to know if your female employees, for example, are much more likely to leave because you could target better. But what we found is that there was not a significant difference between men and women in this research. They were about as equally likely. The big drivers really were the ones I showed you, and everything else was a big statistical zero. So, yeah.
All right, Andrew, we have another question from the live stream viewers. You mentioned job title stagnation, but do you have any recommendations for smaller or growing organizations where the job title is less likely to change frequently, but the roles are expanding? Mm-hmm. Are those employees at risk of leaving as well?
Yeah, so I realize not every small company can promote people every year, especially with pay. But I do think you can make a lot of progress without spending a lot of money by letting people build into their goals and their metrics, like learn a new skill or take on a new domain to be an expert in this year. And that new thing will become part of your job in the following year. So should that be a part of a job title change also? Like, should we change your job title to reflect those new roles? Like, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's a personal preference that will differ among companies. My opinion is yes, I think you should. Like, I think you should have associates and senior and so forth that reflect people's growing scale of their impact and their growing responsibilities. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to offer big raises every year. That's not possible. I don't think you can continually promote people through job titles without ever paying them more. We see that pay does matter. You have to have a combination of role advancement and pay. But I think that just having a playbook in place, like, so when you hire somebody, you're like, up front, you're going to be hired on at this associate level. But the plan is, like, we're hiring you at like 70% of what your potential ultimately will be. And that 30% growth is you moving up through these next couple job titles. And if you do it, great, you're going to stay and thrive. And if you don't, well, maybe this isn't the right fit. So I don't think it's just for big companies. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Sarah. I'm with Innova International. I just had a quick question around that case study. Do you have any insight into how they addressed the gap on the team that employee left from temporarily in terms of those responsibilities, like if they hired a temp to fill that, or if that employee, or if the responsibilities were just redistributed amongst the team?
Yeah, that is a good question. When I say it's a good question, that means I don't know the answer. I try to never say that. So I honestly don't know the answer to that question. So I really don't know. But we do. What I will say is that my co-author, Kimberly Kochenko at ATB Financial, definitely has the answer to that. I wish she were here today. But we have a written case study that's going to be coming out soon from Glassdoor, one of our economic research studies, and it's all about the stuff I just showed you and much more. What I would say is if you really want more detail on that, we're happy to share, and we can connect you with ATB. I'm sure they'd be happy to share their experience. They've had such a positive experience. I think they want to tell the world about it. But no, I honestly don't know. I mean, I assume that they probably did not use temp labor. It most likely was distributing work throughout the remaining team. Anybody else?
Hi, so you mentioned that people typically leave their jobs and go to a company that has a higher Glassdoor rating. So does research show a way that would be a way to get your employees to give a shout out to your company? Like, what are the best ways to get them to go and write those reviews? We've been really trying to ask and suggest, and we talk about it with our managers and how important it is, but we're not getting the response that we're looking for, and I would love your ideas.
We always encourage employers to encourage their employees to leave reviews. What's off the table is compensating people for doing so. But aside from just explaining to people that you want to use Glassdoor as a mirror so that you can make improvements, I think can go a long way potentially with people, right? And I think that sometimes people are concerned about privacy issues, especially at small companies. So it might be helpful to remind them that they can leave reviews without giving their job title, which is one good way to reassure people. But aside from doing that, I think most people are flattered, honestly, that you want to take public feedback. So that's what I would encourage probably, is try to reassure them that anonymity is assured, and that, and then one other thing I would suggest is, you should be responding to reviews that are on there to make it more of a dynamic interchange. So, even a short response to every Glassdoor review someone leaves can mean a lot. Anybody with a free employer account could do so, and I think job seekers really value that. Like, even if it's a negative review, having some response back that's like, well, thanks for your opinion, and here's some counter arguments against it, that can really help a lot. So I would do that.
And I'll just quickly add on to that. I'm on the Glassdoor marketing team. We do have a lot of resources around soliciting employee feedback. So go to glassdoor.com/employers and go to the resources. There are ebooks, templates, and guides on this topic that will be really helpful.
Great. Okay. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Do you have any research that shows if a horizontal move within a company satiates the same need for career growth that a vertical move would?
So this research that we've done doesn't necessarily look at that. It doesn't look at horizontal versus vertical moves. In the research we looked at on resumes, we just looked at progression. So some of those definitely were horizontal, people changing occupations totally, but staying in the same company. We didn't actually isolate that and look more closely at it. We probably should have, thinking back on it. That is a really interesting question about whether you see the same retention characteristics of people moving horizontally versus vertically. What I do know, though, is that the experience of ATB with their program, they definitely have seen retention, because these are some of those people were clearly people who likely would have stepped out the door because they were planning to make a total career pivot, and it's really hard to do that internally if you don't have a program. So hard to reinvent yourself and get people to see you as one thing rather than what you were hired as. But unfortunately, it'll have to be an upcoming study when we dig into that more. Yeah.
All right, we only have time for one more question, so go for it.
Hi, so you spoke about educating candidates. I was curious if you had any research around job descriptions.
Yeah, so what works and what doesn't work in a job description is the question. So I have long been wanting to do a study on this, and I've been trying to for some time. Job descriptions are really messy, and the data are really big. We do have a piece of research that's half-baked I can kind of share with you. We looked at how many requirements people list in job descriptions, and is more better? No, the answer is no. There's clearly there's an ideal number of requirements in a job description, and it's small. It's 6 or something. So let's see. I'm trying to think of some other points that we found. We found something about length. that of course, like people don't want like book-length job descriptions. I'll have to save the rest of it for when we finally do publish this thing. But what we did is we looked through many, many job descriptions and quantified all these characteristics of them, themes in them, words, skills listed, and so on, and just try to figure out like which were jobs that were getting more attention, more clicks, and more applies versus not. Yeah, I mean, I would basically, my opinion is like you want to cut boilerplate and be clear, and let your culture come through in the language and descriptions. So if you're a serious formal company, great, like stick with that language. But if you're a fun, playful, informal startup, like don't be afraid to be informal and fun in your descriptions, because I think people will like have an emotional reaction when they read your descriptions, and they'll ask themselves, do I seem like the kind of person who would work at a place that would write this or not? So that's my best advice for you, is let your real culture come through in the writing.
All right, that's all the time we have for questions. Thank you to everybody who asked.
Thank you very
one.
much, everybody. Really nice to be here. Thank you.